Welcome, everyone. I think we'll just give another minute here until we start the program this morning, but thanks for joining us for those who have already tuned in. Okay, it's 11 o'clock on a Friday. Want to welcome everyone who has tuned in this morning as a follow-up discussion to the State of Farmland Preservation Report that we held yesterday. Want to give a special thanks to LNP and the use of their studio and their team there in facilitating the panel discussion yesterday. Specific thanks to Bob Krasny, who helped to moderate the discussion, and to all of our panelists, Tom Daniels, professor with the University of Pennsylvania, who also helped produce the report that Lancaster Farmland Trust recently pushed out. Gary Kennedy, who was a preserve farm owner, preserved his farm with Lancaster Farmland Trust, and is also a member of the Fulton Township Planning Commission. Scott Standish, the executive director of the Lancaster County Planning Department, and then Alice Yoder, who's the executive director of community health at Penn Medicine, Lancaster General Health, and also chair of the Lancaster County Planning Commission. So just want to again express our appreciation to those folks for their time and their expertise in helping to facilitate that discussion yesterday. A few just logistics. So if you have questions, feel free to populate those in the chat, and then we'll take them as we go along. And we really want this to be more of a conversation. So Karen and I will touch on different elements of the report and certainly address the questions along the way. Hopefully by now you've seen the report and had a chance to review it. If not, you can go to our website, lancasterfarmlandtrust.org, and you'll find a link there that will take you to the report, to the full report, where you can spend some time digesting all of the information and data that's in there. But one question that we've received is, why now? Why do this report? And we spent some time reflecting on farmland preservation over the last, decade or so. Demand from farmers is still exceptionally high. Collectively, between Lancaster Farmland Trust and the Lancaster County Ag Preserve Board, there's 250 farm families who want to preserve their farms. And if resources were available at various levels, whether it's at local government levels, at the county level, state level, or enhanced contributions in the private sector, we could meet those demands. But also with the county's new comprehensive plan, Places 2040, we understand that there's going to be a population growth, and that's going to apply pressure to our agricultural and rural landscape. And not accommodating that growth in a very efficient and strategic manner is going to just result in the loss of more farmland, which currently we lose about 1,200 acres of farmland every year. And we want to do our part to try and make sure that we can keep Lancaster County the beautiful, wonderful place that we all love and cherish. It's an attractive place to live. In the report, it noted some of the call outs from different publications about Lancaster County and the quality of life that it provides. And certainly there's a balance there to be reached in terms of growth, but also the protection of land. And we want to make sure that, we're being diligent in our efforts to protect as much of the Lancaster County's prime productive farmland as possible. We also got the idea of this report from the American Farmland Trust, who last year published a similar report on a national level, which you can go to their website and view. And it sort of triggered the thought in our minds of maybe this makes sense to do something similar in Lancaster County, break it down at a municipal level to see what our local municipalities are doing in terms of their zoning designations, how much of their land is permanently preserved, how much of their land is in agricultural security areas, which is a protection measure, not permanent preservation, but helps protect agriculture. And from our experience, at least in the past 20 years that I've been involved in the effort, I don't think a report of this nature has been put together for Lancaster County. So we thought it was a really good time to take stock of where we're at. So Karen, would you like to say a few words before we start getting into some questions?
Thanks, Jeff. First of all, hello to everybody. I hope if you were with us yesterday that you enjoyed the presentation, the panel discussion yesterday, and that you learned some things. And we're delighted that people have joined us today to do a deeper dive into the conversation and specifically about the report. But we're open to other questions as well. The only thing that I would add to what Jeff said is when we looked at the current state of farmland preservation, there were a couple of things that caused us some concern. Jeff mentioned the waiting list. Of course, there was also that waiting list was coupled with, and a bit of a cause and effect issue here. It was we also have just experienced a decline in funding from county sources, and so we wanted. And in some cases that may be the right thing to do, and in some cases maybe it's time to make the investment. But we wanted to look at what overall, from the federal level down to the public, the residents that live in Lancaster County, what can be done to help preserve farmland. Our concern was that if we continue on the trajectory that we're on, with more and more farmers interested but declining sources of funding, then a projected population increase of over 100,000 by 2040. When those things came together, we probably weren't going to be satisfied with the results because we will have lost a lot of farmland, and that's I think what the report demonstrates, and why we think it's important to have a community conversation around those issues.
So again, just encourage folks who are tuning in, if you do have questions, feel free to populate those in the chat and we'll take them. Karen and I will continue to sort of dive into the elements of the report, and hopefully that might spur a question from some of you who are tuning in this morning. Obviously, we're coming out of a global pandemic, and we touched a bit on that in the report. Another element of timing of this is, for the past year and a half, we've all been a little preoccupied with a public health concern, and farmland preservation, for most people wasn't a high priority, and rightfully so. But now that we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel in terms of the pandemic, we thought it was a good time to bring farmland preservation back into the forefront of people's minds. And I think the pandemic helped to stress the importance of our agricultural landscape, as folks, were locked down at home, were limited in where they could go. They were spending more time outside enjoying the landscape, whether riding their bike, and relying on our farmers for their food needs, which is certainly one of the benefits that we have here in Lancaster County is, if you get out and either ride a bike or just drive in your car, you don't probably have to go very far until you find a roadside stand where you can pick up, today I stopped and picked up 2 quarts of strawberries on my way into the office. And I think during the pandemic, that provided people a lot of security in terms of the ability to do that. One of having access to local fresh foods at a time when the grocery store shelves were limited, and also not have to interact with, a significant number of people, as you may experience going to the grocery store. And I think that helps to, during the pandemic, help to reinforce the importance of our agricultural landscape and the importance of the permanent protection of that land to ensure, hopefully, we don't go through another pandemic anytime in the near future. But certainly that chance is there, and the protection of that land is really important. And just the view shed, I think it, the people that were out, enjoying the landscape, it was a nice distraction from a lot of chaos that was going on in the world. So,
Jeff, I would add to that the we think of farmland preservation in terms of when we drive to work and we see beautiful farms, and we like seeing the farmers in the field doing their work. But I think what the pandemic taught us is that food insecurity is a real thing, and that when supply chains are in any way interrupted, it affects all of us. Alice Yoder from Lancaster, from Penn Medicine Lancaster General yesterday made the point that in Lancaster County, prior to the pandemic, about 9% of people were food insecure, meaning that they didn't know where their next meal would come from. And now the number is 12%. But we all, in some way or another, experience the impact of not having food available during the pandemic. Shelves bare, as you said. We talked about it in the office that you couldn't get flour and you couldn't get yeast. But I think that is an opportunity to shine a spotlight on how important farmland preservation is. You know, when we're importing food, I read an article yesterday in the New York Times about, you know, climate change has come to the West already, and they're experiencing terrible droughts and fires and droughts earlier than they expected. And if you know, we are blessed with a natural resource of good productive soils, and so in addition to wanting to protect the quality of life, the fact that we have a stewardship responsibility to protect that soil shouldn't be lost in the conversation about farmland preservation.
And yesterday during the live stream session, Alice, as Karen mentioned, talked about food insecurity, and Alice referenced Hunger Lancaster, which was, you know, really an important part of our community over the past year and a half. And there's a great connection there, not only in terms of obviously that food has to be produced somewhere, but I mentioned yesterday that we're currently in the process of preserving a farm that is owned by a faith-based organization, and all of the produce that is grown on that farm is contributed to Hunger Lancaster, and they're, you know, really passionate about that particular cause, and want to ensure that that farm is protected in perpetuity. And I'm happy to say that in July, early July, we'll be signing the easement for that farm, officially preserving it. But I think, you know, generally speaking, for the community, sometimes there's maybe not that connection made of where farmland preservation really impacts their daily life. And I think that's a good example of it. And also, you know, I think we discussed yesterday about, you know, opportunities where, as an example, an organization like Lancaster Farmland Trust can do more. Currently, we have 529 farms that we hold easements on. That means there's relationships with those farmers. And as we've seen farms starting to transition from, you know, a traditional dairy operation to maybe more produce, fruits and vegetables, just because of market demands, the opportunity to establish a gleaning program, as an example, and get volunteers engaged to help address some of that 12% that Karen referenced in terms of members in our community that experience food insecurity. So again, just encourage everyone to put any questions that you might have into the chat box. One of the main themes in the report, obviously we referenced a lot of Places 2040, the county's comprehensive plan, which really lays out a framework of how we can accommodate the expected growth in population, but also at the same time protect our natural resources across the landscape. And, you know, a lot of that control happens at the local level. There's 60 municipalities within Lancaster County. Each individual municipality has its own elected officials. They have their own zoning hearing boards. They have their own planning commissions. They have their own zoning ordinances, which become exceptionally complex very quickly. And one of the objectives of Places 2040 is to alleviate, to break down some of those barriers, to get more regional planning among our local municipalities, and thinking beyond their boundaries, because landscapes don't stop there. You know, our farmland doesn't stop at a municipal boundary, and you know, we in many cases have farms that straddle different municipalities at the same time. So having some consistency there is important. But that local control is really where it happens. Those local elected officials are the ones who are really setting the land use policies. And, you know, lack of engagement of the community, of what the community desires their landscape to look like, can really undermine, you know, what we experience when we walk out our front door. Because if left unchecked, you know, and leadership changes, new elected officials come in, any of those local land use policies can be changed. And you don't have to go far in Pennsylvania to see where that happened, some decades ago, where there was, significant development that happened, a lot of loss of farmland. And then the community, sort of wakes up to realize that it's disappeared, and now become extremely active in terms of trying to protect every last, corner of farmland or open space that they may have in their particular community.
Jeff, one of the things the report talks about is it divides the tools that municipalities have available to them into protection tools and preservation tools. And I think people sometimes don't recognize that the municipalities have these kinds of tools that can help farmers, not only help farmers in the short term and medium term, but also obviously in the long term with preservation. And I thought one of the interesting things about the conversation yesterday was the discussion about effective ag zoning, which is something that it's a little complex, and most people don't know about it. But I think that it's just having the goal of reaching what the planning department considers effective ag zoning would be a great step forward that municipalities could take. I don't know if you want to talk about what the differences in the ag zoning are in different townships.
Yeah, it's a great point, Karen. And there is some variation across the county in terms of ag zoning ordinances. And in the report, it identifies that there's 11 townships that have effective ag zoning as defined by the Lancaster County Planning Department, which is one house or dwelling unit per 50 acres. And what that means is if a farmer owns a 50-acre tract, they can have one house or one dwelling unit on that 50 acres. And to be able to subdivide that, they need an additional 50 acres to be able to do that. So the local zoning measures are a really good tool in terms of preventing the severing of multiple lots off of a farm, which long-term may impact the viability of that particular farm, and start to impact sort of the local community services in that particular area. Obviously, if you start having growth popping up in rural areas at some magnitude, then the demands come to make sure public services are there in terms of water and sewer, which then can further lead to additional promotion of development because now that infrastructure is in place. So the ag zoning is
Jeff, I'm going to jump in here because one of the things that people, how people might recognize this is you might drive down a road and there will be a farm there, and you can see that there have been lots subdivided off of that farm, and there'll be houses sort of scattered across along the roadside, and then there's the farm. And that's the kind of thing that effective ag zoning addresses.
Yeah, and it varies, so there's those 11 municipalities, there's other townships that have, ag zoning in place, but it's not at a one house per 50 acres. It might be at a one house per 20 acres or 25 acres or 40 acres, which is still, good in measures in terms of protecting agricultural land. But then there are some townships out there that do not have effective ag zoning. And there is the potential for a lot of risk of development that may happen in a township that does not have effective ag zoning in place, or has ag zoning that allows for multiple lots to come off of a single tract. And I can recall a farm back a number of years ago now in a particular township that the landowners were thinking of selling. They were older in age, and we had some conversation with them about preserving their farm, and they were contemplating the prospects of that. They intended to sell their farm at public auction, and leading up to the auction, they started getting a tremendous amount of interest from developers, and a lot of developers outside of Lancaster County who were interested in purchasing the farm, which was at 90 acres, because the ag zoning in that township would have allowed 2-acre lots to be taken off the entire farm. So essentially 45 2-acre lots to be constructed, which was alarming to this particular couple. And then ultimately, they decided that they wanted to grant a conservation easement to Lancaster Farmland Trust, permanently protecting it because that risk was there. That's some rare cases in Lancaster County, but they are still out there. And that's where the voice at the local level really becomes important. And for the residents to speak up to their elected officials and to communicate, how they want their landscape to look.
Really good point. And one of the things that's included in this report is recommended actions, and we tried to spread those recommended actions across the spectrum so that we address federal issues, state issues, local county issues, local, and even action items that local residents can take. And that's a good one. I mean, if you live in a township that doesn't have effective zoning at one dwelling unit for 50 acres, talk to your township supervisors and your planning commission members and ask them to consider that, because it's a great tool to help farmers, and not too difficult for the townships to implement.
And another great tool are ag security areas, and they're referenced in the report, which again is not a permanent protection. It's somewhat of a temporary measure, but does offer farmers some additional protection against condemnation, eminent domain, helps to provide some protections against nuisance complaints or nuisance ordinances. And you think about that in the context of, you look at the, such a low percentage of our population that is involved with agriculture. We're now a society that has shifted away from people really understanding agriculture, and really understanding that, when it's 1 o'clock in the morning and there's a storm coming 5 hours away, but you got to get the corn silage in, the farmers need to be out there. They need to be harvesting that crop. And not understanding that, as a resident who might not understand why that's important, may get upset about, heavy equipment running at 1 o'clock in the morning. And if you can start to sort of look at, if you have that change in leadership at the local level, and you now have elected officials who really don't understand agriculture, and are taking cues from the community that may want to enact an ordinance that prohibits a farmer from harvesting, at midnight, as an example, that could really be detrimental to, the agricultural industry. And that's what the ag security area helps to prevent, because it does prevent those nuisance ordinances from going in place, and helps to protect a typical farming operation. And there's a lot of townships that have a lot of land enrolled in ag security areas. In the report, I believe if I recall correctly, it's Salisbury Township has the most land enrolled into the ag security area, and have for decades now. And that was really some local leadership there back a number of years that was really advocating for it, helping to spread that message to their farming community, and got a tremendous amount of land enrolled in that. You can look in the report and see the numbers. There's other townships that have very few farms enrolled into an ag security area. So again, that's some of the local influence that can happen, and where some local leadership can be to help promote that. And we generally find that if farmers are not enrolled into an ag security area, it's not because they're unwilling, it's just because they're not aware of what the benefits are. And when explaining what the benefits are to them, it becomes a no-brainer for them. It's also a precursor for the county state farmland preservation program through the Ag Preserve Board. Those programs require that a farm be enrolled into an ag security area. So, we at Lancaster Farmland Trust are frequently encouraging farmers, even if they're just contemplating farmland preservation. And we regularly experience where we'll have families that we had initial conversations 10 years ago. And 10 years later, now is the right time. But we will encourage them to enroll their farms into an ag security area, just because of the benefits that it provides, even if they decide that preserving their farm isn't the right time right now.
And we often assist farmers if we're going through the process of preserving a farm and the farm's not in an ag security area. We'll help the farmer get into the township's ag security area. So it's another thing that we do as part of the preservation if we can. The other thing that I think is, I think it's important to make that distinction between things that are temporary and things that are permanent. As good as those tools are, and as much as we want townships to implement them, we also want to make sure that the farms are permanently protected in areas where it's critical to preserve farmland. And there's as the report points out, there's a lot of ways that townships can do that. Jeff, I'm going to let you go into the technical details of TDRs.
Yeah, it was a tool that was referenced yesterday as well. Again, driven at the local level through municipal ordinances. There's currently 6 townships across the county that have a transferable development rights ordinance, which again, it's a great tool for a local community to have to be able to utilize to protect farmland and natural space that they think is important to their community. And generally the way that it works is by ordinance within the local zoning allocates a certain number of TDRs to a particular property. And in some cases, they will take all of the agricultural zoned area and assigned, one example in Warwick Township is 1 TDR for every 2 gross acres of a farm. So if you have a 100-acre farm, you're assigned 50 TDRs. And then they will, and those are defined as the sending area. And then the township will define areas where they want to accommodate additional growth, where they want to see higher densities, and define those as the receiving area. So this could be for residential purposes, it could be for commercial or industrial purposes, but it's generally areas that are inside growth areas. So where we want growth to happen and where the infrastructure exists to support that. And in those receiving areas, in most cases, if a developer purchases a TDR, they can either exceed what the local zoning there permits. So either exceed the number of housing units that can be constructed or exceed the impervious surface lot coverage that might be permitted in that particular area. And at Lancaster Farmland Trust, we've partnered with, all of those different townships over the years, where we will work with the agricultural community, work with farm families, preserve their farms, acquire those TDRs and hold them. And then we'll sell them to developers to be utilized in those receiving areas. And in the report, some of the examples that are referenced in Warwick Township are facilities like Rock Lidditz and the List Track building and the hospital, the former part of Lancaster Hospital in Warwick Township, all acquired TDRs for those projects, which then results in additional revenue to then go out and protect more land in those sending areas. So it is a great tool. Obviously, those 6 municipalities have had varying success related with their TDR programs, and some of that is driven by, again, the local influence and local leadership at the municipal level of really driving those programs and making them as accessible and easy to use, which is a really key point.
There's a lot of other things that the townships can be doing, and the focus of the report, although not entirely on townships, does spend a lot of time talking about what townships can do, both in terms of protecting and preserving farmland. And clearly funding farmland preservation programs is a big step that the townships can take. And there's a number of ways they can do it. And we include in the report a case study of 2 townships in Lancaster County that transfer of development rights programs, and then a township right over the border in Chester County, Honeybrook Township, that has taken the step of implementing an earned income tax, put it on the ballot. It passed overwhelmingly, and they have now have access to those funds to preserve farmland and have done a great job of protecting the farmland in Honeybrook Township. So there are a number of options that townships can use to fund preservation programs. And the important thing about it, and Jeff, I know you'll agree with this, the important thing about it is having more hands in the game here, having more levels of government and organizations involved in the preservation of farmland, and having them well funded would help eliminate the waiting list that we have and that the Ag Preserve Board has. But it would also speed up the pace of preservation and get more of these farms preserved.
And you can see that within the report, there's a direct correlation with the level of funding that's available in a particular year and the number of acres that are protected. And we've seen that, as farmers talk, the agricultural community is pretty close knit, and communication travels fast. And when farmers are interested in preserving, and that's happening quickly, and there's a lot of farms that are getting preserved, it encourages others to engage in that. So in the report, when you take a look, you can see that there's a direct correlation between number of acres preserved on an annual basis and the level of funding. And we believe that if funding rises back to some levels that we've seen, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, that we would also see that direct correlation in terms of the acres that are protected.
Well, I mean, you can imagine, we used to tell a farmer that it would take about 6 months to get a farm preserved. Now it has stretched out to 2 years and maybe even 3 years. And the comment was made yesterday at the panel discussion. At some point, farmers lose interest. Other options come up. Often, when a farm family decides to preserve their land, it's because it's tied to some life event. The father's retiring and wants to pass the farm on to their son. They're getting ready to sell, or they're looking to expand their operation or change their operation. So if it's not timely, if the preservation isn't timely, then they may move on to another option. And so that's why keeping that level of funding up to meet demand is so critical.
And I'll just add to that, Karen, in the report, and we shout this from the rooftops, but Lancaster County leads the nation in farmland preservation. Over 1,500 farms, over 115,000 acres that's permanently protected, which is great. It's great success. Some of that success, and I think a lot of that success, is due in part to the public-private partnership that Lancaster Farmland Trust has with the Lancaster County Ag Preserve Board. It's not competitive in nature. And their staff and our staff, when we're out talking with farmers, we're really talking about both programs, because the goal of both organizations is farmland preservation. And we want to see farms preserved, and really regardless of which program might be best for them. And that's something that's very unique in Lancaster County. In other places, there are partnerships. I don't think they're probably as strong as what the public-private partnership there is between Lancaster Farmland Trust and the Ag Preserve Board. And give a lot of credit to the team at the Ag Preserve Board in terms of them reciprocating that same collaborative approach to farmland preservation.
I think one of the major takeaways from this, and it's related to one of the questions, one of the major takeaways from the report is if you look at funding and when it was at its peak, and you look at the number of acres preserved in a year, Jeff, as you mentioned, there's this direct correlation. And so as funding has dropped, so is the number of acres that have dropped. And if you put that together with the idea that we're going to increase our population by 2040, it's a collision course. At some point, that development is in farmland, because that farmland's not protected and we're not meeting the density goals set out by Places 2040. So it's not a good course for us to be on if we want to protect our farmland. And I see one of the questions that one of the viewers asked is about doing the possibility of doing a countywide referendum to approve a bond issue for preservation. We talked about this. We talked about this quietly with elected officials, and we talk about it, touch on it in the report. It's certainly a possibility. It's been done in other places. It's been successful, I think, in about 80% of the municipalities, counties that have municipalities, townships, and counties that have tried it. And so I definitely think it should be in the mix as a conversation with our elected officials. Jeff, how about you?
Yeah, I would agree, Karen. And not only, at the county level, that can also happen at the local level in individual township. And as Karen referenced, Honeybrook Township, just across the border in Chester County, is a great example where the local community, through referendum decided to increase the earned income tax by 0.5%. and allocate that for open space protection. So it could be countywide, it can be, individual municipalities, it can be a combination
Could be
of
both.
that.
Mhm.
So it's, certainly an important strategy.
And, I mentioned yesterday that now it's a couple of years ago, I think 2015 or 16, when Lancaster Farmland Trust decided to do a public survey to test the support for farmland preservation and really make that information available to public officials. And more than 80% of the people supported farmland preservation and spending money, county money on farmland preservation. So I think that the support is there, and certainly whether it's at the municipal level or the county level or both, it may be something that we want to consider going forward if we're going to meet the goals of 2040 and get the farms protected.
Karen, I'm seeing one of the other questions from one of the viewers is, are some farms more important than others, and how do we prioritize projects? So we do here at Lancaster Farmland Trust, but also at the Lancaster County Ag Preserve Board, both organizations use a evaluation criteria that is very objective in terms of what we look at. So we look at size of parcels in terms of larger or small. We look at the soil quality on those farms. We look at the water resources on those farms, as well as proximity to growth pressures. And then also, and it's really stressed in the report, the idea of having contiguous blocks of protected land. And we have seen over the years that, farmers who are not preserved, but are adjacent to other farms that are much more inclined to preserve, because they know that their neighbor's farm is not going to become a housing development or a shopping center or some other use that might really be in conflict with their agricultural operation. So we factor all of those in. And essentially, it's what we call land evaluation site assessment, and it tells us by a scoring mechanism, how that farm ranks in comparison to others. At the Lancaster County Ag Preserve Board, they have strict guidance from the state in terms of their criteria, and they really need to start working from the top down in terms of that ranking criteria. At Lancaster Farmland Trust, we can be more flexible. Obviously, that ranking indicates, based on those factors, what are the highest priority farms. But we also experience that, timing of this particular transaction is important. And it might be a transition from one generation to the next. And farmland preservation is a tool that's used to help transition to that next generation. So in our case, that particular farm might not be at the top of our list, but we know the time is right now if we want to preserve it, because the family's interested, they're motivated, and it works for them at this point in time. And if we're not able to meet that immediate demand at that point in time, they may go through that transition, and the next generation may not choose to preserve the farm for whatever reason. So we do prioritize farms in that sense. We still place a lot of value on those farms that are under, sort of the most immediate threats of development outside of the designated growth areas. So you think about those farms that are just beyond it, and what risk there might be to them in the future. So we still place a high value on that particular aspect of our criteria.
I will also say that the county prioritizes farms that are further out, and we have preserved quite a few farms along urban growth areas, which is one way to make sure that those urban growth areas hold.
I see another question from one of the viewers is, what are we doing to help farmers reduce pollution from agriculture, ensure the long-term water quality improvements? So this is an area of that Lancaster Farmland Trust has spent considerable amount of time and energy and resources on, over the past decade to 15 years. Obviously, you don't have to look far to see that Lancaster County is really the hot spot of the Chesapeake Bay watershed in terms of where improvements need to happen to reduce the amount of pollution, sediment, and nutrients that are entering local waterways here, eventually the Susquehanna River, and then into the Chesapeake Bay. and agriculture is at the top of that list. So we're involved, in a lot of different factors there. Directly as an organization, we have a lot of relationships with farmers. So we have an opportunity to have a conversation with them about, what are their management practices on their farms. And I would say from our experience, most farmers, they identify and know where they have those resource concerns, where they have maybe an issue of erosion occurring on a steep slope, as an example. And farmers don't wake up in the morning going, how am I going to pollute the environment today? In most cases, they might not just know what's the best measure to address that issue. They need technical guidance to be able to do that in terms of, maybe it's a grass waterway. Well, that has to be engineered, and who does that? And then who, installs that? And the financial elements are a significant challenge for farmers today. Agriculture is a tough business to be in. And the cycles of highs and lows in markets is just extremely volatile. So it becomes very difficult for farmers to invest their resources into what are called best management practices that do not provide any immediate return. And we typically see that, the cost for sort of the whole package on a farm may be 150, 200, and in some cases approaching $400,000 worth of investment. If they need to stabilize, what's defined as an animal heavy use area. So as you drive around and you might see a brown lot in a pasture where the livestock congregate, that's a heavy use area. And the way to address that in some cases is you actually create a concrete area where you can capture the water coming off of that and manage it. And those types of improvements are expensive. So we have that relationship with farmers. We do this type of work not only with our preserve farms, but with non-preserve farmers as well. And we tap into a variety of different sources of funding out there to be able to do that, whether it's at the federal level, the state level, at the local level. There's a number of private foundations that we work with. Some of those have a very specific focus on water quality, and specifically the Chesapeake Bay. And they understand directing dollars to organizations like Lancaster Farmland Trust to work with farmers in Lancaster County is really the strategy to address, the health of the bay. But that said, it also improves the health of our local waters. It's not uncommon after significant rain events to see Conestoga River, the Pequay Creek, running chocolate brown, and that's due to a lot of the sediment that's ending up there. In some cases, that's associated with agriculture happening today. In other cases, it's legacy issues back when there was a lot of deforestation, a lot of erosion that built up in floodplain areas that now are eroding. Not a direct cause of modern day agriculture, but in most cases, it's happening on farms that are out there. So it's something that we focus a lot of our energy and time on getting the necessary plans. So what are called ag erosion and sedimentation control plans on farms, getting nutrient management or manure management plans on farms, so that farmers know how they have to manage their nutrients and when it's the appropriate time to apply those nutrients to the crops. So it's an area that, and I think currently right now we have upwards of approaching 30 different best management practice projects, in the works. Some we're finishing up, others are just getting started, and working with a variety of partners throughout Lancaster County. We're heavily involved in the Lancaster Clean Water Partners, which is really spearheading some of this effort, collaborating with other organizations such as the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, who's doing a lot of this work, and others, Stroud Water Research Center, partnering with municipalities. A lot of municipalities, in terms of their stormwater management, are facing increased regulations to do that. And in Lancaster County, it's unique because a lot of their what are defined as urbanized areas, which is defined by the census, actually happen to be on agricultural lands. And the opportunity to make those pollution reductions are really cost effective in our agricultural landscape. So we've done assessments on farms in 9 different townships now throughout Lancaster County, where we go and we visit each individual farm and have a face-to-face conversation with them about, do they have the required plans? Do they have best management practices that they want to implement? What sort of financial or technical assistance do they need? And then we bring that information back, and then we compile that and apply for different grants from all those sources, and then rely on the private sector, the ag consulting firms that are out there. One that we partner with quite extensively is Team Ag, based in Ephrata. And they really have the expertise in terms of the engineers on staff to be able to design those things. They're really experienced at working with the contractors who actually do the implementation, but overseeing and supervising that effort. So it takes a lot of different partners to get these practices in place, but it's something we continue to really push ahead on.
I think it's also important that important to acknowledge it as you talk about the work, the conservation work that we're doing. As part of our mission is to preserve the rich, productive soils of Lancaster County. And if they're running down the Conestoga after every storm, we're not preserving them and not protecting them. And so this conservation work just goes hand in hand with the preservation work that we've done for the last 33 years.
And we found through some of our outreach, really focused on the water quality aspect, has led to the preservation of some farms. So it's been a great opportunity to, again, build that relationship. Our staff walks into a farm and it's Lancaster Farmland Trust, and a farmer assumes that we're there to talk about farmland preservation when we really might be there to talk about water quality, as an example. But through the course of that conversation, we weave in farmland preservation with that. And we think, really sort of the sweet spot of those two is when we're permanently preserving a farm and we're also working with them to implement the conservation practices. Making a sizable investment of a couple $100,000 in these practices, we want to make sure it's on a farm that's going to be there long term. And by having that farm preserved ensures that it's going to be there in perpetuity, and that those practices can continue to benefit the community and the environment, well into the future. Which
I think as part of the public conversation about farmland preservation, that's a critical issue. The multiple benefits of preserving a farm, whether it's from the lens of protecting our waterways or our beautiful views or our local foods, or I think that that really needs to be part of the conversation. And too often people don't think of the environmental benefits. We talk about it in the report, but too often people don't think about the environmental benefits of farmland preservation. They like to see the farms, they want them preserved and want them to remain in farming, but we don't talk. I don't think we talk enough about the benefits of farmland preservation from an environmental perspective. Just carbon sequestration and climate change, and the water quality issues that we've talked about, and the fact that they're not paved over, and you don't have the stormwater issues that you would if they were residential developments. The cost of community services and those kinds of things. All of the benefits that farmland preservation brings.
And right now for the audience, there's a lot of, we shouldn't say there is some state funding currently for the water quality type improvements. And in the report, we addressed that in terms of farmland preservation for private organizations, private land trusts, there is no state funding, which we've been trying to advance a bill, Senate Bill 64, to tap into a very small portion of the state funding, which could be used for private organizations. In addition to that, there's a bill in Harrisburg that has just came out yesterday that would inject $500 million from the American Rescue Plan funds that the state is getting into the Growing Greener program. It's being called a Growing Greener 3. But really, the emphasis of the Growing Greener program is an environmental focus. And it's an environmental focus to address many of these items that we just discussed, whether it's water quality aspects. It also directs dollars for farmland preservation, but also directs dollars for protection of natural areas as well. So I would encourage those who are viewing today that if those types of environmental issues are important to you, to reach out to your local legislator and tell them that they should be supporting a Growing Greener 3 at $500 million because it's important to you as their constituent. So that's something we are going to get some communication out today. We're hearing that, there's probably less than a week in terms of discussions in Harrisburg of when those decisions are going to be made. So it's really timely right now to get that communication out there. But certainly if you have specific questions, feel free to reach out to me, either via email or call our office, and certainly happy to have a conversation. But that could really be significant in terms of the Growing Greener program. And just looking at some of the numbers related to farmland preservation, there's the potential that it would direct $22.5 million for private organizations, which today we get zero, and that 11.25 million of that would go to the Susquehanna River watershed. Obviously, that's where Lancaster County is. So there is the opportunity that it could yield significant dollars for farmland preservation, in addition to significant dollars for the water quality aspects.
Yeah, definitely important. We talked in the report about residents how can residents get involved, and it's a question that we get asked pretty frequently. But there's a direct way immediately that people can get involved and bring more dollars to the table and really help Lancaster County.
And when you think about farmland preservation from the private organization's perspective, and this is noted in the report, the Lancaster Farmland Trust, over our entire portfolio, the easement value. So when we preserve a farm, an appraiser goes out there, independent, and they appraise what the development rights essentially are worth. Collectively, over our 529 farms, it's over $95 million worth of value, for which Lancaster Farmland Trust has paid less than 17 million in payments to acquire and remove those development rights. So, about 17% of the value works out to be $545 per acre. And you think about that in the context of protecting the most productive non-irrigated soils in the entire United States, located within the Eastern Seaboard, close to major markets in terms of New York City and Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, that really rely on the food that is produced here. It just really seems to be logical to make significant investments in the protection of Lancaster County's farmland, for all of those reasons. And this funding through Growing Greener 3 certainly could be a significant boost in protecting a lot of land across the Lancaster landscape.
Jeff, I think you used the word a couple of times now of investment. It really is an investment. If we think about it in terms of, it might be a little increase in our taxes, or you have to you do a bond issue and borrow money, or it's investments being made. And the point was made yesterday in the panel discussion that just as you would make an investment in infrastructure, in roads or bridges, or this is an investment in infrastructure that has economic value and environmental value. And I think that's, if we can look at it in terms of it being an investment for the future, then sometimes it makes more sense to spend the money to people and make that investment. And we know, especially as population increases, that the land values aren't going to get any less. They're only going to go up. I mean, land values, farmland value, the value of farmland now in Lancaster County is kind of at an all-time high. And we continue to see that rise. So it's not going to get any easier to protect our land. So now would be the time to make that investment.
Yeah, and that's right, Karen. In the report, it calls out that average price per acre for farmland is about $22,000 per acre. That's an average across the county. But you can look at individual properties based on size, and it's not unusual to see sale prices of $30,000 or $35,000 per acre. And there was an example here not that long ago of a farm up in West Earl Township that sold at $76,000 per acre, which was just staggering, that sort of sale price. And when you think about that in the context of a farm family who, may be struggling with an agricultural operation because the markets just aren't there to support it, and there's not high profit yields in farming these days. And when you start looking at values of $30,000 or $35,000 an acre for farmland, and then think that in the context of what they might be able to receive, from development in conversion that farm, you can understand why farm families may make the decision to sell that farm for development purposes. or sell a farm in Lancaster County and move to Kentucky or some other state where farmland is a lot cheaper, and they can go and they can buy land and buy a few hundred acres for extended family or something like that. As Karen referenced, that's not going to get cheaper. It's only going to get more expensive. And we can look over in Chester County as an example. Average prices of farmland there are exceptionally high. And the local organizations there or the county ag preserve board over there have to pay significantly more in terms of a per acre amount to preserve that agricultural land.
So, and the more you have to pay, the less farmland you're preserving. So now would be the time to make that investment. I think it's probably also a good time to acknowledge the financial sacrifice that the farmers make when they decide they make the commitment to preserve their land. At some point in the future, that land could be worth a lot if they sold it for development, and they give up that financial benefit by preserving their land. Jeff, I thought you answered it well yesterday, but I thought Gary Kennedy did a great job in describing why he decided to preserve his farm. And I think that's something that we can't lose sight of. And really the reason why we get up every morning to come to work is to make sure that we can fulfill that promise that we've made to farmers to protect their land. But they certainly don't do it for any financial benefit. They do it because they want that land to be available for future generations to farm.
Yeah, that's right. And in the report, it references the challenge grant that Lancaster Farmland Trust has received now 16 years in a row from Lancaster County and the commissioners at various levels. But when you look at those numbers, the county's investment, of just over $9 million to date, but has yielded, over $49 million of value. And the lion's share of that value, 35 million or so, is that direct non-cash charitable gift from farm families that said farmland preservation is really important to us. We want to do it now. We're not in this to make windfalls of profits. We want to see our farm protected, and in most cases may only be receiving 20 or 25% of what their appraised value actually is. And again, it's just from a financial perspective really communicates the dedication and commitment that our farmers have to their land and to the Lancaster County landscape. And we often reference that the success of the Farmland Preservation Program in Lancaster County, while we have two great organizations in Lancaster Farmland Trust and the Lancaster County Ag Preserve Board, would not be possible without the farming community and their sacrifice and dedication to the effort.
Jeff, when you were talking about the numbers, all I could think about was, if anybody was offered the guarantee that they would get that kind of return on an investment, they would make it in a minute.
It's impressive. For every dollar invested through that challenge grant, it's about $5.25 worth of return.
Yeah, not a bad return that the county's getting on their investment. So they're good numbers to know.
So we're closing in on the top of the hour here. Just if there's any last questions that any viewers have, certainly feel free to post those into the chat. Again, thank you all for joining. We appreciate your time and interest in the topic. We were really, ecstatic about the opportunity to put this report together, to collaborate with Tom Daniels on this work, to really help tell the story of farmland preservation, of where it was and where it is today, and what some of the concerns are moving forward. Again, if you've not seen the report, you can access the report on our website, lancasterfarmlandtrust.org. We also have some upcoming additional news to share next week. We mentioned this yesterday that currently right now Lancaster Farmland Trust has 50 farmers on our waiting list. We want to address that, and this report, we hope, provides the buzz and discussion in the community to help us achieve that goal. And we'll be launching a capital campaign next week to help preserve those 50 farms. So I would encourage you to check that out. Go to our website. You'll find links to a special website specifically for the campaign. And obviously, again, appreciate your time and support of farmland preservation and support of Lancaster Farmland Trust. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Good job.